Hello everybody and welcome to J Arcade. Today we're going to go through what I did to mod my arcade machine for the Marvel Champion Arcade1Up. So when I received that, when I bought it back in 2020 during the pandemic. It was late during the pandemic, and I wasn't sure if I was going to purchase any more. I did put it in a spot in the living room that, was kind of showing it off and such. But, I did like the games that came with it, but because I wasn't sure if I was just going to be my only one or not, I did decide to do a couple mods. I will say that the mods that I've chosen were pretty expensive, considering you're buying an arcade machine just to mod it. But there was probably some other methods that I could have done to save a bit of money, as well as I did have two different revisions. So I did have one that I tried to do, and it worked fine. However, I realized that I actually kind of wanted to do a bit more with the arcade machine, so I did a different revision as well. Now, this is not going to be a step-by-step tutorial of the modding of the machines for your own. However, I will post the information and resources below that helped me complete my task. Alright, now we're taking a look at the arcade in which I've modded. As you can see, it is the Marvel Champion Arcade from Arcade1Up. And you can notice here I did make some modifications, but I didn't upgrade the marquee to a light up marquee. I didn't really like the idea of having a separate plug just for the marquee and having to unplug it every time I turn off the computer. Wasn't my preference. I'm sure there's some ways to get switches with it, but the ones that I've seen online at the time I purchased this were more like just plug it into the wall. The buttons down below here are convex buttons. These buttons I prefer over the concave, especially for fighter games. I also find these ones that I purchased, which are essentially came with the controllers and the buttons, were all a knockoff, but it works really well. Like, I play the fighting games, I don't have any issues performing moves, and yeah, it worked very well for what I had. And I never really got to use the Arcade1Up controls before I took these out, but that's it. And here is the buttons that I have below. There's just some extra ones here. I did have to drill those in because it didn't come with that little area. So I had to take that piece of wood that was there and drill it with, and I did make a mistake doing so. All right, so we're just gonna take a quick look here. As you see, this is fully functional. It does come with a bunch of different emulators I put on here, including the, it's essentially the whole package is RetroPie. So if you're not familiar with RetroPie, I'm gonna put a link below on how to actually install RetroPie, either with an actual Raspberry Pi. You can use that with the 3B Plus, or even a RetroPie 4, which is probably the most preferred one to use. In this is very different. This is actually a PC, and I installed it differently than what was recommended, and I'll go through what was recommended as well. As you can see, there's lots of games I put on this. Around 4,000 games, I think more than 4,000 games. So it is stocked full of just arcade games and then all the consoles as well. All right, we're going to go ahead now and just take a look on the side of the machine here. As you can see, this is the Marvel Champion from Arcade1Up. And we're just going to take a quick peek around the back here. And we'll go through what I had added on. I'll show the original pieces in a little bit, but this is some of the mods. So this was part of a package here, which allowed you to use the monitor that came with the arcade machine. You connect it through HDMI. That's essentially what that is. It's held there with tape, and the other thing was held by tape as well. So I guess double tape, I guess double-sided tape. It's kind of holding it all together. However, the board is a little bit hard to stick on because of the different metal pieces in the back. So I had to use a different type of tape, and even though it's hanging off there, it is actually taped on. It's just that the tape itself is a little looser, which has some space in between, allowing it to kind of hang there because it keeps falling otherwise. And you can see the buttons in the back that I had to do. Those are part of the package that came with the buttons, and it's just hooked up through USB. It's pretty easy. Down below, yeah, you're going to see the stereo system. It's just a Logitech. I think it's the Logitech C310. So it is a bit old, but it does have a subwoofer and 2 speakers. No speaker holes are drilled in. The sound is fine. It comes out through, and I can turn it up and down. I do have the controls on top of the arcade machine, which I can dial up and dial down if I want it to be louder or quieter. And as you can see here on the side, this is the actual PC that I'm using. It's an HP Elite. And I do have the specs for it. It is an i5, and it does have a 1030 NVIDIA graphics card. It's currently got Ubuntu installed on it, and the reason I installed Ubuntu was because I also wanted to install Steam on it so that I could play some Steam arcade games like Shredder's Revenge, or like we were playing Plate Up, and some of the newer arcade games like the newer Street Fighter and the newer Mortal Kombat and that kind of stuff, and Blaze Blue and such, which is good. It's great to play in arcade, actually. As you can see here, Ubuntu is installed. Ubuntu. It is not the newest version, because it's not the newest version I had when I installed it. I think it's actually Ubuntu 20.4. It's one of those. So now I will say this, and I said this in a previous video before: if you install Ubuntu on these machines, currently, if you try to install RetroPie, which I think is the best way right now to install an emulator, it's especially if you're not using Windows, you're only going to get like the 32-bit version. If you want the 64-bit version, and the reason that you would want that is if you are looking to run some emulators using the RetroPie, which is using Emulation Station, which is using RetroArch, so it's all kind of like mingled in together. You'll have to upgrade it to 64-bit if you want to use like Daphne and some other wackier, more difficult to find, experimental, I suppose we should call them, devices. Experimental emulators. So if you want those more advanced ones, you're going to have to get the 64 OS version, which means you're going to be installing it. And yes, you can just install it right on a Raspberry Pi. It doesn't have to be a PC. Now the PC here, I bought it used for about $65. It was a really good deal, and it was a previous workstation used at a business, so it kind of worked out for me. All right, now here's the original PCB that came with the system itself. Now this had just the 4 games on it that came with it, and of course all the hookups for it. It was really easy to remove. It just had remove the 2 screws on the side and just unplug the stuff, and it was simple as that. Like, really, the other stuff was more complicated to put on. But here's all the buttons and stuff that came with it. I'm not using any of them. If I ever decide to kind of make a home arcade and I didn't want to, then I could just use the PCB in another system, or hook it up. But the thing is most of it's proprietary connections, so it's not going to be that helpful. So that's the arcade. Now I will say it did cost me about $50 something, I guess, to get the actual buttons and the controller, which is not too bad. It's around $50 or $60, I think it was, Canadian. And I had that shipped here. It took a while to ship. The computer I bought locally, like I said before, it was used for $60, which was great. Now, before that, I did actually buy a Raspberry Pi 3B Plus, and that came with an okay size. I think it was like a 32 SD card. And I was able to upgrade that to 128 gigs of an micro SD card. And I ran that for a while too, with all the same games and everything on it. Now, it wouldn't run a lot of the 3D stuff, and it only would probably be best used for the RetroPie OS, which was fine because it was able to transfer files back and forth and such. But once again, it came to my head that maybe I want to try with Steam, because Steam now, with the Steam Deck being out, it has Proton. And if you're not sure what Proton is, it's a layer that they use to translate games into, I guess, the Steam codecs, I guess you want to call it. So that means that like Windows games that you would only be for Windows, you can run on Ubuntu using Proton, because that's the same system, like, you know, Android, same kind of system that the Steam Deck uses, and play a lot of these games. Not every single game is on Proton or Ubuntu because using this method, but a great deal. Anything you can do on the Steam Deck, you can do on Linux. So, and that wasn't always available. So it's really great now that that's a really good option, and people have been using it successfully for some time. So yeah, talking about the costs. So the arcade machine itself, I think it was $500 Canadian. So right there, you're buying the machine. So I'm not really saving money modding, you know. If I wanted to save money, there was this YouTuber that I've watched recently who built one basic with no money. Batpixel is his name. You can go ahead and check out his link right here, and check out his stuff with regards to how he did an arcade machine basically with no money in 2015. And as for me, I spent the $500 for the machine, $50 for the buttons and the controller, and technically I spent $60 on the Raspberry Pi, which I ended up not using. So if I end up making another machine or wanting to mod, at least I have a Raspberry Pi. Honestly, I do have an idea for it, but it requires another monitor and some more space, so we'll see. Other than that, the machine itself only cost me like $60 or $70 for the HP, and the video card cost me another $60 or $70. It was during the pandemic, a little bit after actually, that I bought the video card, because I was using just the onboard video for quite some time before I had to upgrade it. Vegas 3 chip that's inside of this device caused a lot of emulation issues. So I don't know if that's just something that happens, or I even tried to install like the drivers for it and such. It just didn't work out, so I had to get a separate video card, and everything runs fine. So in total, you know, if we're not counting the money I spent on the Raspberry Pi initially, 5, 6, 7, you're looking at like $700 on this machine. So definitely up there for more of the expensive ones. Now, if I were to do this again, I would just get a Raspberry Pi 4 and just use that, and an SD card that, you know, something with 64 gigs on it, or even 100 gigs, 126 gigs, 128, and just use that. I think the Raspberry 4 is pretty efficient. It can run like a lot of emulators. I think it even can run like Dreamcast, which is pretty advanced, right? So, but yeah, other than that, I'm pretty happy with the way this runs, and I hope it helps you or inspires you to kind of mod it yourself. It's not that difficult. I know it's a bit of a daunting task, especially when you look at this from the outside in, but really the control panel is just a matter of unscrewing it all, removing the buttons, screwing in the new buttons, and that's like a very simple thing. You can do that in probably 10 minutes or so. It's a very easy one. When it comes to setting up Ubuntu and then setting up RetroPie from scratch using the OS, that takes a bit more time, and you might end up having to be a bit more finicky with it. It does require a mouse and keyboard and such to be able to do this, but I think it's a worthwhile time if you're willing to mod. And you know, I happen to be willing to mod one machine, but the other ones I don't think I will. So all right, well, thanks so much for watching. I hope this helped. And if you like what you see, please like the comment below and let me know. Take care.